everybody. Hey, thanks for joining the June webinar today with Hackberry Farm Photo School and me, Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm here in Dodge City, Texas. I always give a weather report. I don't know why. It's just kind of what country people do when they talk to each other. You always ask about how's the weather. Weather's been a little bit hot here in Texas, not terrible, seasonal, I would say. We had so much rain in the spring. I mean, so much rain. It seemed like it rained every day from January through almost the end of May. But typical of Texas, when it stopped, and it's been pretty dry here for the past, really all month. And so we had a few showers here and there. Well, the only showers I've seen is, I don't know if you follow along or not, but if you do, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, and this is the first time you've heard about it, I've got another project I'm working on right now called Redlands Ranch, and it's a 160-acre property I have in Northwest Texas. It's a semi-arid climate there, and I did a little private tour out there a couple weeks ago, and when we got there, they'd got like 3 to 4 inches of rain overnight. And it's not really desert country, but it's not it's not the eastern United States either. It's somewhere in between. They get about 20 inches of rain a year out there. And because of that, everything flooded. Luckily, I've got a ground blind out there that sits in the ground. It's got a water hole in front of it. So when you're in the blind and animals come to the water hole to eat and drink, then you're at eye level with the animals, even the birds or the rabbits. You're at eye level with them. It's a really cool experience. Luckily, me and my partner, when he and I built the blind, we did all the dirt work right, and so we got a little bit of mud inside of it, but it wasn't bad. But it was just horrible traveling out there because I had to borrow a side-by-side from one of the neighbors and to get in and out of there, because the vehicle I was in, I just didn't think we'd make it. And so we didn't try to, we tried not to get stuck. But the good news is, out there, if it rains one day and the sun comes up, the country dries up pretty quick. The country dries up pretty quick, and so we could pass by about the end of day 2. We could kind of get in and out of there, so it worked out pretty good. Hey, one more thing before I start. I'm getting an email from someone saying the connection's not working, neither audio nor video. Any suggestions? And but they're able to chat, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Can give me a thumbs up or put in the chat that you can see and hear me right now before I get going too far. Okay. I think Rena's how you pronounce her name. I'm not sure what's going on, Rena. I'll follow up with you later on. If you registered for this, I've got your email address. I'll follow up with you, but you'll get the replay either way. So you might just start clicking around on buttons, and let me respond to her real quick about that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. Hey, this month's webinar is Thinking Beyond the Telephoto, capturing nature photos that don't, and I've added this on there, don't only rely on telephoto lenses, is our topic of this month. And what I mean by only is there's a couple of techniques I'll share here with you today that have telephotos as part of the mix, but it's a way to modify telephoto lenses that maybe you haven't thought about before. And so there may be some things you haven't thought about before. It's just a new way you used all your old equipment before. So during this presentation, I'll do the typical slideshow. I've got another video or two. We're going to try some embedded video and see if that works, see if it plays through for you. If not, I can share those links later on if it doesn't work out, because you know how technology goes. You try new things. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then I'm going to show you a demonstration on how you do one particular technique I think you'll find pretty cool. So anyway, as always, if you have any questions as I go along, feel free to go ahead and ask those questions as you go along. And Wendy, I appreciate it. I think you answered Rena on that question. So feel free to answer any questions that go along, ask any questions as I go along, and we'll be sure to get those answered. So with that said, I think we got all the questions answered. We're ready to go. with that said, here we go. One of the things you can do to really get a neat look, everyone's used teleconverters before, but one of the techniques I've tried in the past, I don't use it all the time, because one of the problems is if you start shooting really high magnification shots and you're shooting through a lot of air, that air that you shoot through is inherently dirty, especially this time of year when we've got heat bubbles coming off the ground and you've got, the winds blowing around, everything's dry, the air's a little dirtier. So the more air you shoot through, the more inherently unsharp your pictures are going to be. That's why whenever I talk about wildlife photography, I know you can take a picture of an animal and crop, and then be able to get something that looks pretty usable. But to but if you can crop, but the problem with cropping is I think it's a better technique to get closer to animals, because the problem with cropping is eventually, because you're shooting through so much air and you're further away from the animal, that inherent unsharpness is going to occur. But I say all that to say, when you stack teleconverters, in other words, I put a 1.4x converter on my telephoto lens and then put a 2x teleconverter, you get some pretty extreme focal lengths at that point. And when you do that, I use it sparingly. All these techniques we talk about today, I don't use them necessarily all the time, but when I use them sparingly, they're just tools in the toolbox that you use. It seems to work out pretty good. Like this shot here, the moon was setting behind this windmill, and because the moon was going through a lot of air at the horizon, you're looking at it through a lot of atmosphere, I wanted to really accentuate the size of the moon when I did this. And so I stacked teleconverters. Now, a word of warning, you need to look at your teleconverters, because I know, like on Canon, and this may be the case on Nikon too, I think it is, the ends of the teleconverters stick out a little bit, so you can't naturally make two teleconverters together, because you'll end up scratching your lenses. And so what I end up doing is using, and I'll talk about this in the next slide, I end up using an extension tube between two teleconverters, because that'll give you the space where you can stack two of them. And the way that looks is, if I'm shooting a 500 millimeter lens and then I put a 1.4 converter on it, I'm at 700 millimeters. And then if I put a 2x converter on it, that puts me at 1400 millimeters. So that shot there was shot at 1400 millimeters. There's not a, you could crop that, you could crop into that, but you still can't get that look. That's why the stacking the teleconverters is important, because that's a native optical look that you get when you do those teleconverter stackings, and you just can't get that look by cropping. So that's how that picture was made. Again, I don't use it all the time. When the occasion occurs, like on this particular thing, or if maybe I've got birds on a feeder in the backyard and I just need to get a little extra distant or extra closer, a little bit closer to them, stacking teleconverters is the way to go. Again, all these things I talk about today are not techniques I necessarily use all the time, but they're just tools in the toolbox that are good to have. One of the things I would recommend, not only on this type of photography, but also on a lot of other types of photography, is I always put notes on my phone. So that way, if I get hung up in the field, I can refer to my notes. Again, that's kind of my inventory of the tools in my toolbox, all the things I know how to do or all the things I could do. And a lot of times before I go on a shoot, I'll look at that and think, okay, I'm going to be out shooting pictures by my wetland in the morning. So aside from a typical telephoto shot, what are some other shots I could take? What are some other tools in my toolbox I can use to help get those shots? And that's what we're talking about here. So stacking teleconverters. And so the next thing I want to talk about are extension tubes. And extension tubes are a really cheap tool to have, that you can either buy a third-party manufacturer, which I think Velo is a common one I see, VELO, I think, or VELLO, I can't remember exactly, I think is the brand name of them. For a good set of third-party extension tubes, they're, I don't know, probably 75, 80 bucks, something like that. They're pretty inexpensive. Again, since I shoot Canon, these are native extension tubes, are made by Canon. I actually bought these used. I bought them off KEH.com. I don't have any kind of business affiliation with KEH. It's just the company I've used for a long, long time now, probably 20 plus years. I've traded with them, and I like them because everything they say, the way they grade their equipment, everything they say, the way they grade it has always been correct. I haven't had any issues with any equipment I bought from them, and you can usually get a little bit cheaper than you can buying new. So you can go on places like KEH and buy these extension tubes. Typically, they either come in a set of two or three. They either come like this is a 25 millimeter extension tube. You can see it's written on the side of it, EF25. And they also have a 12 millimeter extension tube, which is thinner. And so when you put them together, it makes 35. Now, that's two extension tubes that you can make essentially three extension tubes out of. Now, some manufacturers will have a 12, 25, and a 35 or 37 millimeter extension tube. I did my math wrong on the last one. But the Canons just come with two. But it's really versatile. Like I said before, when you have teleconverters with Canon, you have to use an extension tube in order to stack them. But another thing it does is it turns any of your telephoto lenses into essentially macro lenses. They just are able to focus a lot closer. I don't know. I'm not an optical physicist. I can't go into all the reasons why that it makes it focus closer, but truthfully, I don't really care why the reason it focuses closer, but the fact that it does focus closer is what I appreciate about it. And so you can take those extension tubes, and it just makes the lens a lot more versatile. You can, like all these pictures here we're taking in the flowers in the Smoky Mountains. That's people always think I make up the name of plants when I say them, because I'm kind of a plant nerd and I know a lot of plants. But it's a dwarf crested iris on the upper right. It's a type of phlox. I'd have to look it up on the lower right, and then on the left, this is the one with the crazy name. It's called Mountain Dog Hobble, and it just, again, if you're using a typical telephoto lens when you're out in the field, you can't focus that close and get that close to it where you can get those really, really creamy out of focus backgrounds. If you've listened to me in my webinars, you've said it before, I'm a sucker for out of focus backgrounds like that. And the way to achieve them is you've got to have a relatively far distance between the subject and the background. So the way you make backgrounds like this, it's a function of how close you are to the subject and how far the subject is away from the background. And so with these extension tubes, you can get pretty close to the subject, which optically speaking, it's a forced perspective sort of thing, makes the background further away from the subject. And then all of a sudden you get these really creamy backgrounds like you see in the picture on the left and the one on the lower right. Now, the picture of the dwarf crested iris on the upper right, if you notice there, I'm shooting straight down on this flower, so the background isn't nearly as far away, so it doesn't look as much out of focus, but it's still out of focus enough to be able to get this shot. So extension tubes are great for doing that kind of stuff. I'm going to show you a video real quick. Someone pop in on the chat if this doesn't play. So this is new to me. This is one of the things that I'm trying out for the first time on this platform today. So we're going to see if this is going to work. This is how I use extension tubes in the field. And these videos are fairly short, by the way. Okay, I'm hearing that video's playing but no sound, so I don't know what's going on there. So anyway, we'll let me try it this way. Okay, I'm getting reports of no sound. I'm not gonna play through there. Essentially, and again, that's what I meant about technology. You think it's going to work, and then all of a sudden it doesn't, even all the tests I did. So what I'll do when I repost this video, I will put links into these videos so you can go back and watch them. Again, they're short. This is 4 minutes long. But essentially what I do, I'll fast forward to this part of the video. That's my setup right there. That's a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. It's a 12 millimeter extension tube, and it's a flash on top. That's how I modify the telephoto to make it work in a kind of a different way than it was planned. And then I'll go through here. These are the type of shots you get. Just some good environmental shots. The good thing, I don't include this in the conversation today. I don't include this in the conversation today, but if you've never used flash in the outdoors, that's a good way to use it, especially for macro. Most of these flash units today, back in the day, it used to be pretty hard to use a flash, but today you just you put the flash on top of the camera, connect it with a cord or connect it wirelessly, and the flashes really do all the heavy lifting for you at all. So I've got another video on this, and we're going to skip past it next time, and then we'll be able I'll link those videos later on. I'll link those videos later on, and when I resend everything out. So apologize for the stumble on that one. Another thing I like using, again, just a tool. Don't use it all the time, but this is especially useful. A lot of the work I do assignment work for magazines, and so I'll have to go out, and I've got like a day or two to shoot pictures of these animals. A lot of times they're big, sometimes they're small, like this Dunes sagebrush lizard. And so the question is, how do you get pictures of an animal like this and be able to get it well composed, everything work out right? You can see I'm eye level with this animal. How do you make that work when that lizard is only like 4 or 5 inches long, and they're skittish? And so, to give you the backstory on this particular lizard, they're a endangered species, and they live out in the sand dunes of far west Texas and eastern New Mexico. And so when this magazine was doing the story about them, because what made this so important is because this particular reptile threatened to at least not necessarily completely derail, but curtail oil development and oil production in the most productive oil field in the United States, which is the Permian Basin. And so that's what made it so important. It's because all of a sudden you could see this clash coming between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the oil interest and all that. And so I found a scientist who was studying these lizards. So I went out with him because he would trap them every day and go back and check on them and put pit tags, which are passive infrared or passives, not infrared. Anyway, something passive transmitters. They put them under the skin, and then when they catch them again, they know if they've caught that, they know which individual it is because they use the scanner and can scan over that pit tag and it's got a unique ID number. So I went out with him, and he's the one that actually handled the lizards for me. But what I mean by aquarium is I went to Walmart and paid $10 for an aquarium like this, and then because what you can do then is I use it to shoot all kinds of little critters, from these dune sagebrush lizards to even I did a story about crawfish for a magazine a few years ago. How do you get into a crawfish hole, because they live in mud holes, and take a picture of one where you can see it, where it looks like it's alive underwater. And I use it for a lot of small stuff. Turtles, I use this technique for. Keeps them calm. They calm down. I didn't keep them in there forever, but just long enough to shoot pictures of them. But essentially what you do, oops, I went too far. Let me go backwards. Essentially what you do is inside the aquarium, you build a habitat that looks like it does all around where you found the animal. So on the dune sagebrush lizard, I took my hands and just dug up some sand, put in the bottom of this aquarium, put a few sticks in there to make it look natural. And then when you shoot through it, you can see here, you can't see the glass in front of you, nor can you see the glass behind it. And as you shoot through it, you set it in a place where it looks like you're in the habitat where the animal's found naturally. And so that's what I did there. And then I took advantage of shooting straight over. So with both of these animals, that technique I showed you before, we use the flash that's connected to the camera. I put the flash over the top of the aquarium and use just a scrim, or it's like a sheet or something to put over it to diffuse that light coming through. and you're able to get pictures like this. For the crawfish, all I did there was I put some sand, bought some sand from Walmart, play sand, put in the bottom of the aquarium, which they don't really live in sandy country because they live in, they like kind of clay type soils, because when they dig their burrows, they want those burrows to stand up. Can't do that in sandy country. But it's a problem I couldn't solve. In order to have a clay bottom, I couldn't get clear water, because every time I put water in, if the water would settle out and get clear, I'd put the crawfish in, and by him crawling around, he would stir everything back up again and make it murky, because that's how they like to live. And so in order to solve that problem, I just used a sandy bottom. The water was a little bit murky, which that's okay, and I was able to shoot those pictures like that. And so that doesn't really have much to do with the telephoto lens, but it's a good way to use any other lens in your arsenal to be able to shoot pictures like this. So it's a really, really neat technique to use. And that aquarium, I don't know what they cost now, because I bought two in the past. That aquarium cost about $10, probably a little more expensive now, but I bought it at Walmart. So the glass is pretty good. All you have to do before you use them is clean the glass up. Again, build the habitat inside of it. Put your turtle or whatever in it. Take a few pictures of it. Turn your turtle loose, and then move on, because the turtle's no worse for wear, and you're able to get some nice shots of some animals that you really couldn't do otherwise. And then this is one of my favorite things to do. And I'll go ahead and tell you this: camera traps do require you to buy a little bit of equipment. You can homemade some of your stuff. In fact, my first camera trap I ever made was I used an ammo can that I bought from Bass Pro Shops, and then I cut a hole in the side of it, and then I put plexiglass over the top, just bolted plexiglass, used silicone to kind of clear it. It took a little bit of work, but I could use it to keep my camera dry when it was in the field. Now, since then, there's places like Camtraptions is the name of it. I'll include that in the link when I post this video. In Camtraptions, they make these housings that fit your camera, and they're completely waterproof. And then not only do you get the housing for the camera, you also use a passive infrared sensor to trigger it. These work pretty simply. They're like, if you think about, almost everyone's seen game cameras. Like, you can go to any place that sells sporting goods, Walmart, I'm sure, I think Target may sell them. I don't know, Bass Pro Shops, Cabela's, any outdoor retailers. But these game cameras were developed for hunters to be able to put in the field and to be able to monitor the deer and stuff that's coming around on a particular property. Well, since then, people have started using these camera traps to do essentially the same thing. But the problem with the traditional game cameras actually, there's two problems. Number one, the image quality is typically pretty low quality. They've got a small sensor. They may be, I don't even know if they're as good as cell phones now. The image quality has historically been pretty poor. And then number two, and I haven't seen one yet. Maybe they make one today. I could be wrong about this. But number two, every game camera picture you take, because the manufacturers know you're going to share that stuff, or think you're going to share that stuff online, they put their logo on every picture, and then also a lot of them put the time and date stamp it, like the old digital cameras used to do back in the day. And so I'm not a fan of that. I want a clean image. So thankfully, companies like this started manufacturing the whole setup, the housing, passive infrared sensor. I think this housing, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong on this, I think this housing is probably a couple of $100s to buy. They're really durable. I've had mine for probably 5 or 6 years now, and it's still going strong. Like anything else, as long as you take care of it, it'll last forever. And then the passive infrared sensor, I didn't actually buy the one made by this company before they started making them. I had one made from another company that I just integrated into this. But essentially, with the passive infrared sensor, whenever something moves in front of the camera, it takes the picture. And so what's good about these, what's really handy about these, I think, is the fact that you can use wide angle lenses to take pictures with these camera traps. So you can see here's some examples of pictures I took with it. The two bucks on the right, they were both shot with 16 millimeter lenses. And as you can see, again, I go back to using the flash again, using flashes that you can just buy, from any camera retailer that sells your brand of camera, and really not having to think about flash settings, just setting them out and letting them go. You can tell these are studio shots, essentially studio shots with wildlife. It's a 2 and 3 light setup a lot of times. The one on the bottom, it's a 3 light setup. There's a light on the right hand side. I say the 3 light source setup. Let me say it that way. There's a light set up on the right side of the deer, a light set up on the left side of the deer, and then we just get the sky behind it. If you notice that picture on the bottom, you can actually see stars in the sky. And then above that picture is that's another buck. It may be the same buck. Anyway, that's again a basic 3 light setup. Light coming in from the left, light coming in from the right, and then the sky behind it is the third light source in the picture. And it gives just a really cool look that you don't see every day. And plus the fact that you're shooting with a wide angle lens, that's to me that's another kind of cool look that you can use with camera traps. Here later on in this presentation, I'll show you a way to use wide angle lenses without having to invest in a camera trap, and which is still equally as effective, I think. And then the picture on the left is a bobcat. So I first bought this camera trap stuff. I was doing a story for a magazine called The Secret Life of Bobcats. And in it, I hypothesized that I'd hypothesized that there were bobcats living all around. I just didn't see them because they're really good at hiding. And so one of the things I did is, if you can see to the right of this bobcat, that's a dead deer there. I lived at the time is when I used to live in the Panhandle near Childress, Texas, and I lived about a mile off the highway down a county road. And in Texas, you can't, in probably a lot of states, you can't legally pick up road killed game animals. And so I talked with the local game warden. He knew what I did, who knew who I was, and I got permission from him to be able to move the animals if they were killed on the highway, be able to move them off the highway and onto my property. And so during that year, I moved 3 or 4 does off the highway and then moved them onto my property. And the first day I set one out to see what would come to it and set out the camera trap. This bobcat started coming in and feeding on it. Turns out this bobcat had a baby with it too, and so she was finding an easy meal for her baby to be able to feed off of. And so this particular picture here was taken about 50 yards from my house. And all winter long when I was doing that project, I was getting pictures of this bobcat and another male. And the fact is, I never saw them one time other than when I captured them with this camera. And so, which kind of led me to my next project I've been working on. I'm not finished with this one yet, but I'm also working on a long-term personal project called The Secret Life of Wildlife. And so what I'm trying to do is capture as many images as I can of wildlife moving around on my property after the sun goes down. And so the holy grail right now I haven't captured or 2 of them are beavers and otters that I know I have on my property. I'll see them during the day sometimes, but I really want to get pictures of them at night because beavers are almost always nocturnal. And so I see the signs of what they've been doing on the property, but I haven't seen them at night. Now, if you decide you want to do camera trapping, it's best if you have access to private land somewhere, because, when you leave stuff out like that, it can go missing. The only thing I've ever lost, and it's still a mystery today, is I lost one of my flash units and it's completely gone. And I don't think anyone stole it, because if they would have got that, the camera was in plain sight. If they would have gotten the flash, they surely would have gotten the camera. So I'm either going to blame Bigfoot, I think is my first person I'm going to blame, or probably more likely, I think a coyote might have came by and just grabbed it and carried it off somewhere. I don't know what happened to it, so it's not there anymore. And because I think it might have looked like it was trash, because I've got a low-tech way I protect my flashes from the elements, because they're only out there for about a week at a time, maybe a couple weeks at a time. But my low-tech way is I put them inside Ziploc bags just to protect them from the elements. And so I've lost one flash. But another thing I do as well is I don't use my best cameras for this either. Typically, my older cameras, once I've upgraded, I don't sell my old cameras. And so once I've upgraded cameras, I will put them and deploy them as the camera trap cameras. So like these pictures were taken with the Canon 60D camera, so that's a DSLR. It's probably a 10 or 12-year-old camera. And I always buy a used lens. I don't buy my main lens to put inside that. So if it were to get stolen, hopefully it doesn't, never have had any problems with it yet. But if it were to get stolen, it's not necessarily the end of the world. I wouldn't want it to happen. But again, I'm not left flat-footed, because this is all equipment that I have deemed expendable if it were to get stolen or a tornado hit it or a wild pig tear it up or something happens. So, but it's just an awesome way to be able to get shots like this. Again, uh, there's a doe and a fawn under the stars, or there's a wild pig that was coming into one of my sets, or you get, have you ever seen a bobcat wink back at you? And that was a bobcat with a 16 millimeter lens feeding off the deer carcass. So deer carcass is kind of gross, I get it, but still it's part of nature. It's the rule of nature is for some things to live, other things have to die. And of course that deer wasn't killed by a bobcat, it was killed by a car, but nature's cleanup crew helped take care of and dispose of the body in short order to help the spread of any kind of harmful bacteria. So I've got another video I was going to show you on that. Again, I'm not going to skip that, so I'll link the videos later on so you can see that when I send out the replay of this video. Let me go past that. So here we go with wide angle wildlife. Because I'm skipping the videos, I kind of had those timed into our full hour. So likely we may end up a little bit short on that. So again, if you have any questions, that's a good time that we can do Q&A towards the end of this. I'm not set to any specific time though. If this takes me an hour and a half to get through, it takes me an hour and a half. But usually I try to make these last an hour, but I'm just saying that so you know that because the videos aren't playing through and we're going to have to figure out something different for those, we may end up a little bit early. So if you got any questions, feel free to ask away. So wide angle wildlife. This is one of my latest obsessions I'm trying to figure out. I don't have a whole lot of pictures yet because I haven't seen the right setups a lot. But when I do, I was thinking today as I was going through this presentation, where are some possible places around here that I could do wide angle wildlife? One of the things I'm thinking about is I call it facetiously, I call it my world famous hummingbird perch, because we have a day camp out here on hummingbirds. We have a lot of hummingbirds that come through in the fall. And when we come out here, everyone takes and posts a picture of the hummingbird on the same stick because it lights there. But one of the things I'm thinking about was how cool would it look? And I don't know this yet, but I think it'd look cool to shoot a hummingbird with like a 15 millimeter fisheye lens and just put that lens right against that perch and just have the picture of the hummingbird with his wings wide open as he flies in to land. Doesn't have to be 15 millimeter. Maybe it's 16 millimeter non-fisheye. But again, it's the cool thing is for me, and I think you'll find it too, whenever you start trying to solve these problems, you just start thinking about the process. And the number one way to get better at taking pictures is to think about it and to go out and practice it a lot. And so it's like learning. I give this analogy a lot. It's like when you're a kid learning to walk. Part of the process is you're going to get up and you're going to fall a lot. You're going to make mistakes and mess up, but eventually you figure it out. And that's what I think. That's what I love about thinking about nature photography and wildlife photography in this way is how do we use the tools we already have, take some really engaging pictures, because again, just the exercise of thinking through it, trying to solve the problem, trying to use the equipment, figuring out like exposure problems and all that, just working through the process makes me a better photographer because it makes me think about it and I go out and I'm trying to solve those problems. Undoubtedly, it'll make you a better photographer as well. So with wide angle wildlife, I'll show you a couple of examples I've got started on pretty quick. This is probably one of my favorites. This was a chipmunk taken in Rocky Mountain National Park. This is at Dream Lake. If you've ever been there before, you might recognize it. So it's a pretty good hike up, but once we got to the lake, I noticed that a lot of people were feeding the chipmunks around there. So they were really, really used to seeing people. Now, don't type in the comments that, hey, you're not supposed to feed wildlife there. And I never fed it. I get that you're not supposed to feed wildlife there. But for some reason, this chipmunk thought I was going to feed it because I kept getting close to it with my wide angle lens. I took this with a 16 millimeter lens. And when I got close enough to it, you can see it there stretching out just a sniff of my lens and to see if there's any food there. And so I was able to get the picture like that. The thing I like about shooting wide angle wildlife is just such a different perspective because number one, you can get the picture of the animal and be able to tell what it is, like this chipmunk. And to me, it's a super cute shot, but it also kind of gives some context to where these guys live. You can see the mountains in the background, the pine trees, the uh, everything about it. I just like this shot. And so that when I first shot that picture, it kind of set me on a mission. What are some more pictures I can take like that? And so again, I don't have a deep portfolio of them. I'm not going to sit here and show you 50 pictures I've taken with my lens because you get the point. But I don't have a deep portfolio of them. But it's something I'm constantly thinking about. Given the opportunity, I try to shoot pictures like that. Here's another one. I dreamt this picture up after I shot that picture, and I had in mind what you could do. Then I started thinking, okay, how can I solve this problem with more skittish animals like these wild pigs? And so living in Texas, and I don't know where everyone's from who's listening today, probably like a lot of y'all, but living in Texas, uh, the we have a lot of wild pigs here. And so I was getting where I could go out and see them just about every time I went out into the field. And so then I started thinking, I wonder if you feed them. And the feral pigs, by the way, are if you don't know what they are, they're they pigs are not native to North America. They were brought over with the Spanish, like the horses and other livestock. And so forever, there weren't a lot of feral pigs in the country. And so what a feral pig is, it's not a true wild boar, but a feral pig is a pig that can trace its ancestry to domestic livestock, domesticated livestock. And so I can go on and on about these feral pigs. I've done a lot of work with them in the field. But essentially, uh, at some point in the 80s in Texas, we reached a critical mass. And that's the thing that I don't think anyone can really answer is where all the feral pigs came from. They don't know if they were turned loose by people on ranches just wanting to have something else they can hunt, or number two, because of changing demographics and people leaving farms and the pigs just starting to reproduce over time, you reach this critical mass where the wild pig population just explodes over a short period of time. Now, I can tell you, here on Hackberry Farm, when I grew up about a mile away from here, but about 2 or 3 miles north of us, there's a creek that runs through the county, big creek called Bodart Creek. And when I was a kid, there used to be an old farmer who lived across the creek, and he would free range his pigs in the woods. And I remember as a kid, we'd go by his farm and you look in the oak trees, and there'd be a big old 400-pound sow, and she'd have 12 little babies following her around. Well, over time, as he got older, he quit taking care of his fences as good. Pigs started getting out. Instead of seeing them in his pasture, you'd see them on the road somewhere. Well, over time, those pigs get out and they start reverting back to the wild state because pigs are smart, number one. Two, they're resilient, and they're also tough. And so over time, what was once a wild pig, they start reverting genotypically to their wild. What was once a domestic pig, over time, genotypically, they start reverting back to the wild state. And when they do, you get feral pigs. And so I would notice these feral pigs because they're wild. You can't pet them, but they would, they when you pull up in the pasture, they'd be 200 yards away watching you. And so I started thinking, I wonder if I started feeding them, would they come to one spot? So every day I'd go out there and I'd dump half a bucket of corn on the ground, and I'd go out there again the next day. And so I noticed over about 2 weeks' time, because again, they're smart. First time I see them, they're 200 yards away. Next time I see them, they're 100 yards away. After a few times of feeding them, now when I drive out there, they're 25 yards away, just staring at the edge of the brush, waiting on me to dump the corn off and drive away. So to get this shot, one of the things I did was I set my camera up on a tripod, dug a little bit of a hole to get it low. And then again, I took a chance that the pigs wouldn't be able to see the or mess with my camera. So I used an older camera, just like the camera trapping. And then once I got in my truck and I drove away about 100 yards, the camera's there. This is a shot that I dreamt of. I wanted a silhouette shot. The way the clouds looked were a bonus. Wanted silhouette shot, had the camera really low, fed a small pile of corn. One pig walked in, and I fired my camera remotely from my truck just to be able to take that picture. Didn't know what I was getting until I looked again. And when I saw it, I thought, okay, I nailed it. That's exactly what it would look like. What makes this work for me is the fact that of all the ways the pig came in, it's facing into the camera, number one. Number two, I mean, there's always things that can be improved. Number two, the leg's right, but really number three, the head is turned just the right way, and his mouth is open just enough to kind of you can see through part of his mouth, and just to give a little bit of implied action to the shot. And so that's again the way I use wide angle to do wildlife, and that one really worked out pretty well. So the tools are pretty simple. You can use a DSLR or mirrorless camera, a wide angle lens of your choice, and then some way to remotely fire the camera. Now, the good news is with these new mirrorless cameras, uh, I think most all of them have a dedicated app you can buy that lets you do remote firing from the camera. You can also buy a third-party trigger like a Pluto trigger. I've got one of those too. I use it for a lightning trigger, or I plan to use it for a lightning trigger. I haven't really got out and tried to use it yet for that or not. But it also allows you to fire the camera remotely. But the limitations of those of the native camera apps for the Pluto trigger is you have to be pretty close to the camera because they work off Bluetooth. Now, there's another company, and these are made for primarily wireless flashes. And some of the camera manufacturers may have this ability, but Pocket Wizard is a company, and you can go now online to one of the sites that sell you stuff like KEH and buy old Pocket Wizards, and they're really probably $25 a piece. They're really cheap, but essentially a Pocket Wizard has a transmitter and a receiver, and the receiver hooks to the camera. You plug it in with your little, it plugs into your little remote, where your remote plugs into your camera. Your corded remote plugs into your camera, and then it sits on top in the hot shoe, and essentially it's a radio trigger. And so those things work from about 300 yards away. So this picture here that I took, that's what I used. I used a Pocket Wizard to be able to fire that, because once you get a few feet away from a DSLR or mirrorless camera using Bluetooth, the Bluetooth isn't effective anymore. But those point-to-point wireless devices that use a radio signal really work good. And Pocket Wizard may not be the only one. That's the one I'm most familiar with, but it works really good to be able to do that kind of thing. So as I think about this, I mentioned the hummingbirds would be a good place to try this on. I've got a squirrel that robs a feeder in my backyard all winter long, and I've been wanting to try it on him I have this thought in mind of using a wide angle lens and getting a picture of the squirrel leaping over the camera to get to the feeder, and just what that shot would look like, where you can't see the feeder in it, but you're just getting the picture of the wide angle squirrel as he's leaping over it. So that's one of the things I've had in mind. And there's all kinds of things you can do, wide angle birds. If you leave the camera out there, they eventually get used to it. And I say eventually pretty quick, especially in the wintertime. If you feed birds and the birds are coming to the feeder, there's a lot of different ways you can get the animals kind of habituated to it. And I don't know what it is. Animals seem to be oblivious to anything but the human shape. If it's not human shaped, they seem to ignore it pretty quick. I mean, even with the camera traps I set out, I don't even try to hide them. I just set them along the edge of a trail or somewhere I know animals are moving through, and they tend to get used to it, pretty quick. And then GoPro pics. This is another thing I'm gonna try to show you a demonstration. This is the last technique I want to share with you, but it's a cool technique because, this is essentially shooting wide angle wildlife. But one of the things I try to do whenever I go somewhere where I know there's going to be a creek or a stream that has clear water, and I think I'll see fish, like this picture was taken in Wyoming of this Yellowstone cutthroat trout underwater, and to get the split screen, I use the GoPro to do stuff like this, and I do it without really getting wet. And so you may be asking, how in the world do you accomplish that? And I'll show you a couple other pictures. This picture is of a Florida gar I took in the Everglades. It was shot with a GoPro. It was shot without me getting wet. It's not a selfie stick because I would never own one of those, but I've got a stick that I can put it's actually a pole for a boom mic, but I can put my GoPro on it and I can put it underwater and to be able to shoot pictures like this. And then again, this is when I was in Alaska photographing bears, because one of the things I like doing is telling the whole story. The bears are there, they're eating something. What do the fish look like before they get eaten by the bears? And so in order to accomplish this, I used the GoPro. Didn't get wet when I shot it. Well, I was wet because I was standing in the water. I mean, I had waders on, but I was able to put my camera underwater and take pictures. But the trick is is not shoot still pictures, because you can't be down there looking through the camera, pressing the button on it. The trick is shoot video. And here's my demonstration. Give me a chance. I'm gonna switch this over right quick to another screen. So I think you should be able to see, this is Lightroom. And so in Lightroom, you can actually look at videos and you can scrub through videos there. But sometimes you have to do it kind of frame at a time to find one. But like right there in that video, if I decided that's a worthy picture, and you don't have to do anything special on this, this is built into Lightroom. But if you notice on the play bar at the bottom of Lightroom, it's got a little square right there, and you can capture on that, and you can do two things. You can set a poster frame, or what I do is I capture a frame. And so when you do that, all of a sudden, you've got not only the video you shot, but it also makes a still frame of that for you. It's moving slow for me. But anyway, it makes a still frame of that place in the video for you. Again, the trick is you've got to find it where you've got a clear shot of the where you've got a clear shot of the subject or whatever it is. Let me switch this back over real quick. You've got a clear shot of the subject. Oops. Hang on a second. Wrong one. There we go. So the trick is you got to get a clear shot of the subject, because when you shoot video, it's all kind of interlaced together. So sometimes when the animal's moving its head, it doesn't come out clear because it's shooting it at a fairly slow frame rate compared to if you're shooting a still picture. But when you find one where it's fairly still and you can get a sharp image, like these are a little unsharp because they're underwater. But when you can find a sharp image, you can go into Lightroom and just select that frame, and then it makes a JPEG for you. Then you can do whatever you would normally do. You can color correct it. You can do your edits on it. It's not quite as versatile as having a raw image, but it still works nonetheless. And so that's a great way of using a GoPro, and then just, again, run it on video. Because these newer GoPros, I don't know what the latest specs on GoPro 12 is, but I've got a GoPro 10, and I think it shoots at 6K video, which would be, I'd have to do the math on that, how many megapixels that would be, but they're high megapixel video to be able to do 4K or 6K. Now, will it look good on a billboard? Maybe not. Will it look good on social media? Yeah. Or would it look good on your website? Absolutely. In fact, some of these images I've done like this particular picture there, that was a double page spread in a magazine that I shot. And again, all I did was I had this GoPro in a special housing so you could do the above and below. These fish kept swimming by. I shot the pictures, shot the video of it, went back and found the picture I liked the best, or the frame I liked the best, captured a still out of that, and then moved on from that. And so that's how I do all these things. It's really effective for using for fish. I would recommend you try it. One of the pictures I've been wanting to get of like this of a fish, or carp, because I think carp are kind of a weird looking fish, but they're pretty fascinating. But I will warn you, about a year and a half ago, I think it was, I was photographing some alligator gars like this for a magazine story, because there's this place called the Texas Freshwater Fisheries Center, and one of the things that I've been blessed enough to be able to do is make relationships with a lot of people. And so the biologists there, I knew them because I was actually working for the magazine that's part of their department. And so they allowed me to come early because they've had this big, it's a display tank, because they've got kind of a museum in there of the Texas Freshwater Fisheries Center. But essentially they've got this big, I don't know, it's like an acre in size, that looks like a natural swampland, but they have alligator gars, and they feed those gars every morning. So they let me come in when they're feeding the gars, so it'd be close. So I climbed on a ladder to get over this wall, put my camera down in the water to be able to get pictures of the gar. And when one swam by, it thought it was and these things have a lot of teeth in their head. And when it swam by it, I thought it was a bait, I guess, and it bit the camera and ruined my GoPro. So GoPros have an unlimited, no questions asked warranty. And so when I sent it in, they did ask me the question, how, what happened to this camera? Because they were trying to understand what makes their cameras fail. And I said, this is going to be a first of a kind for you. And it was. I said a gar bit it and it ruined it. And that's what happened. So, but I did get it. The card was salvageable, and I did get some nice pictures to run with that story in that magazine. So anyway, this is your chance to tell me if everything I've said, or do y'all have any ways that you use something other than telephotos, or a way that you modify your telephoto lenses to use them in kind of an unconventional manner? I'd love to hear that, because that helps me learn more. And we're all in this together, so we're all in here to learn this. If you have any questions, just pop them into the chat, and then I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one and just ask any. I'll go to this one. Any questions? I'll keep this one up here. Encourage you to stay in touch if you have anything. I'm not seeing any chat, so I'm not sure if people are. Oh, there we go. We got some new ones coming in. See, I'm not sure. I don't have any. I thought I had some new questions coming in. I don't have any new questions coming in. I guess if you can still hear me, I'm not sure if you can, when we had that mix up on the video earlier or not, if that messed it up. Okay. Yeah, everybody can still hear me. So if you don't have any big ideas or any big questions, feel free to stay in touch. There's my email address. Lindsay, you can tell everybody, you can vouch for me. I'll return emails. You sent me an email the other day. I always return emails, or if you want to see what we're doing from an educational standpoint, this isn't a sales pitch, because there's plenty of free stuff on there. Go to hackberryfarmtexas.com. You can look through our entire video library, which includes all the old webinars that I've done, in addition to all the short videos I do from my Wildlife Photo Show YouTube channel. You can take a look over there. And then if you're interested, you can look on there. We've got our 2025 destination workshop schedule out. We're already getting some of them where they're sold out, but there's a good mix of trips there all over the country and in a couple of parts of the world. So if you guys need anything in the future, feel free to reach out. Mary Beth had a good comment. It's been wonderful information. Always provide me with something I did not know, which is a lot. Well, Mary Beth, you know plenty. You've been with me before. And so it's always fun just to share these kind of things. Because, again, that's what I love about photography. I literally think about it every day and think, how can I solve the same old problems and take new pictures in ways that I've never taken them before. And that's what keeps me motivated. And to be able to share that with you guys, again, is an honor and a blessing. And I'm always happy to do it. And so with that said, if anyone, I'll wait around for a couple more minutes. If no one else has any questions or comments, sorry for the mix up. Oh, Randy's got one here, but let me finish up. Let me before I read Randy's question, let me finish my thought. Sorry for the mix up on the video. Again, I will put those on there. When I tested that internally, it worked. Don't know what happened when we tried to play it for you guys through this platform, but we'll figure it out. Randy says, turned an iPhone upside down and stuck it in the dirt so the camera was level with the ground, right in front of a snail that was cruising by. Background was Cades Cove Mountain. That's a cool shot. I'd like to see that sometime, Randy. That's a good use of that. Yeah, the iPhones are a good tool as well. In fact, I did a trip to the Everglades a couple of years ago and did a side trip to see manatees. And one of the things I was trying to figure out was how, if I started adding the manatees to my main trip, how do we do that without getting people to have to go buy a bunch of technical gear to do underwater photography? So I found a housing that works pretty well for your iPhone, and was able to take the over and under shots in the water and even underwater. So that's a great use for that camera, Randy. Rob said, very informative. Thank you. Looking forward to tonight's presentation. Like I said, if you haven't seen, if you're a member of the journal, and you look in on that presentation tonight, one of the things, I'll tell you the backstory tonight when we get there a little more in detail, but I've been doing pictures for a long time. Started when I was a teenager, fell in love with it early on, decided that's what I want to do for a living, and figured out a way to do it. And so tonight I'm going to share with people how to sort of the pipeline, how it works to to take images that will get editors' attentions, and how you can get your pictures published over time. So anyway, it's going to be a good webinar. Thank you, Jill, for your comments. If that's all, like I said, stay in touch. Check out my website, hackberryfarmtexas.com. Love to hear back from you. Love to hear your thoughts, and love to hear your, like Randy said, what you're doing with your camera and how to take some creative shots, and love to hear your suggestions for webinars in the future. That's always a good thing for me too, because I'm doing 2 a month now for B&H Photo. So the pipeline is turned on. I got to come up with a bunch of new ideas. So if you got any ideas, share those with me as well. Anyway, I did stretch this out to an hour. It's 12:58. I can't believe I did it, but I did. So thanks to all y'all. And yeah, James, look for those extension tubes. Really cheap, but I use mine most in the 70 to 200 lens, James. And it's really versatile to make it a macro lens, or to make it a close focusing lens. Don't know if it's true macro or not. But another good thing I use it for is like my 500 millimeter lens. If I'm shooting pictures of dragonflies. Dragonflies may be the hardest wildlife I've ever tried to take a picture of. See, because they're so skittish. But with a 500 millimeter lens, you at least give you some working distance, and I can use those extension tubes to be able to get closer there. And I've tried those things out on everything from a 16 millimeter lens and up. So they're pretty versatile for no more expensive than they are. So it's a good tool. And Jeff says, always good to hear from a good old boy. Thanks, Jeff. I take that as a compliment. If I don't know if you read my webinar but I said last month, I've got an accent. I'm not very fancy. I try to distill things down, even in my own mind when I'm out taking pictures, and simplify everything. And I said in the end, I can only be who I am because everybody else is taken. So Jeff, I take that as a compliment. And so it's a compliment of the highest praise, because that's what, when we're describing people that we know out here in rural Texas, if I met Jeff and someone else says, do you know Jeff? If I said, yeah, Jeff's a good old boy, that everybody knows what that means. And it means he's someone of the highest character. So it's a compliment from a Southern Missouri hillbilly. So thanks a lot. I know exactly what that means. And I appreciate that, because again, I take that as a high compliment. So it's good to hear. Well, everybody, I appreciate it. I'm gonna let y'all go. Like I said, if you think of any other questions, feel free to send me an email. Again, appreciate everybody's support, everybody listening in. It's always an honor, and I will see y'all next time. Thanks a lot.